We have a tendency to want to worship and admire the men in the Bible. They were prophets raised up by God to speak what God told them to say. And God used these men to speak to the children of Israel, to the Jews, to the Gentiles. But these men weren't perfect. And, Abraham, he went out and had a child with a concubine because they got impatient about God's promise of Sarah having a child of her own. They went into a city and lied to a Pharaoh, saying that Sarah was his sister. David had an affair and committed murder. Paul persecuted Christians. He killed them. All these men were like us. They had the same weaknesses and flaws because they're human. But it wasn't about the men. It was about God and their hearts before God. He called David a man after his own heart. And, when David was being pursued by Saul and he had enemies that wanted to kill him, he went and hid in the rocks. And, he was completely alone. And if you think about today, what would that look like? When people go through things, typically everyone around them abandons them. And, but if you know them when they're living that sinful state of all the bad things they're doing, and it's a downward spiral, people will abandon them. But if they're on the upswing and they're winning, or what they appears to be winning, and they've got it all together now, and then the people come back. But during the trials and tribulations, people will jump ship. And, I would say probably just about everybody, if you've lived long at all, has experienced that. And so, where's the mercy that God showed you when you were going through things? And, you could look at it from two perspectives, like possibly God removed everybody else out of your life to bring you to the end of yourself. It's just you and him. Who else are you gonna talk to? And, and God can do that while he's working in your life. But there are situations where, people need mercy and they need grace, just like you did when you went through those things. And, in Psalms 25 and starting in verse 8, good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he teaches sinners in the way. The humble he guides in justice, and the humble he teaches his way. And the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth, to such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. For your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. Who is the man that fears the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way he chooses. So we can't determine, it's not up to us. It's not our business to determine how God teaches somebody, because ultimately he has to bring us to the end of ourselves. And so we recognize that we need him. And, when you look at, people like to be like, oh, well, I didn't commit murder. I didn't sin. I didn't steal. I didn't, whatever your sin might be. But the thing is there's no partiality with God, and sin is sin. It doesn't matter if it's murder. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to say this, it doesn't matter in your past if you had an abortion. These people are not yesterday's garbage. They're very pulled away by the world telling them that it's okay to kill your unborn baby. But it's still alive, just as though someone who's in prison for murder killed someone else, an adult. You know, it's still life. And there's no condoning anybody's sin. Like, I can't condone my sin, and I'm not going to condone somebody else's. But it doesn't mean that there's not mercy at the foot of the cross. It doesn't mean that. And that comes through a repentant heart. But, you know, if you read Romans 1, backbiting, gossiping, strife, boasting, pride. I mean, you could just go through countless sins that are listed there. There's no difference. If it's sin, it's sin. And we all need mercy and grace. And, you know, our sin is something that God deals with. It's not up to us to point out, oh, well, your sin's worse because you murdered another human being, or, you know, you robbed somebody, or you gossip about people, or you're covetous of people, or you're envious. I mean, backbiting, you name it, you know, and we all need God's mercy and grace. And, you know, even when people are going through things and it looks like their life is a mess, they still need mercy. And as believers in Christ, we are to show them the same mercy that God showed us, because we should be trained by his mercy and grace to extend it to others. And you don't know what God's working in their lives, and that's not even our business. That's completely God's business. And as believers, we should be extending mercy and grace to everybody, because at some point in whatever situation it is, even if it's not what people scale as a horrific sin, still sin. And, you know, God's mercy extends to everybody. It's for everybody who comes to him humbly and with a repentant heart. And, you know, we should be an example of the grace and mercy that God shows us.